All right. Well, excellent. Thank you all again for making time for us today. Super excited about 2023. We will be talking a lot about shifting culture and modeling change. And I am super excited to introduce Kym Ali as our speaker today. Um, if you happen to see the bits on LinkedIn that I put out, Kym got on my radar through Justin Gaudier's Wicked Energy podcast. And if any of you have not already listened to Justin, I definitely suggest you pop in on some of his episodes. He is hilarious. He sits in Katy, Texas, but he is a graduate of the GEM Energy program here at UC Denver. And really, really neat guy. And we got to meet one step removed through that program. So anytime he has a really interesting guest and it's somebody I'm like, oh, they'd be so great for Lean In, or I need that person in my world, I reach out to him and he has never failed me. And Kym was one of those wonderful introductions. So very excited about her getting to share her story with all of us. And with that, I'm going to let you take it away, Kym.
Thank you so much, Kat. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for extending the invitation. And welcome, everyone. Just want to say thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here today. And so if you are curious how a nurse in the healthcare industry transitioned into a DE&I consultant in the energy industry, then you were in the right place. And as Kat stated, my name is Kym Ali. I am the owner of Kym Ali Consulting Firm. And not only am I a nurse, but I am a DE&I consultant and a mental health coach. So let's get down to the nitty gritty, because I know you're wondering, how did I pivot? So my first introduction to energy actually happened, I would say, in 2011. And I went to the continent of Africa, Ghana to be detailed, and I went with a girlfriend of mine. And there were a couple of things that stood out to me on that trip. For example, if you aren't aware, whoops, excuse me, that was weird. But if you aren't aware, the country has rolling blackouts. And so what that means is that about 6 to 8 hours out of the day, there's no power, no access to electricity, heat. If you're fortunate enough to have AC, there isn't any AC, you literally have access to nothing for 6 to 8 hours. And, as a tourist, I thought, wow, this sucks. But just from an energy equity standpoint, I thought about people who have health ailments, what if you have asthma and you need to do a nebulizer treatment and you don't have access to electricity? If you are diabetic and you need to plug in your glucometer machine to check your blood sugar, right? So those are the things that popped into my head. But back then I was young, it was just a thought. Once I go back home to the States, I can go back to electricity 24 hours a day. And unfortunately, that is a luxury that we do take for granted. So now, as I mentioned, this was in 2011. So now, fast forward 3 years later, I had an amazing opportunity to go to the Middle East, to a country called Qatar. If you don't know them, they are the ones that just hosted the most recent World Cup. And as you know, the Middle East is the largest producer of petroleum. But my assignment was to open a women and children's hospital, but more from a religious and cultural lens, right? And so the hospital's mission was to open a women and children's hospital, but they wanted to have a Western healthcare model while preserving the Islamic and Arabic culture. Well, I'm sad to say that originally we missed the mark, right? Most of us were either from North America, Europe, or Australia. And so we came in with, the West is best attitude. This is what we do back home. This is what we think you guys should do. And we failed miserably. When we opened, we received multiple patient complaints. People were not showing up for their appointments. And so it was beginning to impact the revenue. In addition to, patient dissatisfaction, employees were dissatisfied. We had multiple resignations. And as you know, when you live overseas, there are multiple expenses that are incurred when you travel to work abroad. And so we had to take a step back and say, what are we doing wrong and how can we fix this? And so what we did was we really started to approach things from a DE&I lens. We started looking at our policies. We started looking at our recruitment practices. And most importantly, we started facilitating focus groups with the women in the community. And so what we discovered was that Arabic women, Muslim women wanted female physicians, right? It's against their culture to have a male physician, especially when we're talking about a subject that's as sensitive as obstetrics, because there's certain parts that you have to look at. They also wanted Arabic speaking physicians, right? Another thing that was vital that we discovered during the focus group or data collection process is that there was a dire need for education. When I relocated to Qatar at the time, they were the #1 in the world for obesity. And so women genuinely wanted to understand, well, why is it important for me to show up for my glucose challenge test, right? Why is it important for me to keep my, monthly, weekly, biweekly prenatal appointments? And so we did a lot of education within the community. And we went back and reassessed and we nailed it. Within a year, we managed to save the hospital $9.3 million in save turnover costs. That's because no one resigned, right? Because what we did, we ensured that there was coaching and mentoring in place for the nurses, that they had a job coach as soon as they onboarded to make the training process easier and to ensure their success. We also provided Arabic speaking physicians like the women requested, right? We did educational programs, not only at the hospital, but within the community. And so by doing that, we were also able to decrease gestational diabetes by 33%. Meanwhile, while all of this transformation was happening within the organization, I befriended some female friends who were in the oil and gas industry. And so while all of this, magic is happening at my job, I had to listen to the horrible stories that they would tell me. For example, I had one girlfriend that worked on the rigs and she was harassed on the rigs. There were not sanitary products made available for her. And the treatment was just really, really horrible. And so I always said, you know what? If I ever get a chance to just, dip my toes in the industry, I really would like to, see change and transformation occur. Because as you all know, especially oil and gas is the least diverse industry out there. And historically, it has been dominated by Caucasian men. And so as women in the industry, I'm sure once you enter into an organization, it's very hard to advance. In fact, studies show that it's a little easy to get to a managerial position, but when we look at senior leadership and C-suite positions, the higher you climb up the ladder, those numbers fade very quickly, right? And so that needs to change. And so while I did really good work at my job, I was also unfortunately experiencing a microaggression in the workplace. And so between all of that, when you look at it from a 360 lens, I knew that it was my calling to go into diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so relocated back to the States. And now, as you know, there is this big, audacious goal to transition to clean energy. And so because of that, we need to have everyone at the table, right? We need to have more women at the table in order to make that happen. We need to have more people of color, people from the LGBTQ community, the disabled community, the neurodiverse community. Everyone needs to be included in those conversations, right? And so essentially that is how I transitioned from healthcare to energy. But just so you know, there are some components of healthcare that are embedded in energy. So for example, um, a lot of plants historically were built in underserved communities. And so there are studies that link childhood asthma, even cancer to the fallout from these plants, right? And so it is, as a nurse, that's something that I'm also passionate to is, health equity when it comes from an energy lens. And so I want to pause there because I do have a treat for you after this, but I want to pause and just answer any questions regarding my experience living overseas, um, what it was like, how did I transition back? Any questions, I would love to answer them before we move on.
Deanna here. I was just curious, when you went on your trip to Ghana, what was the main source of energy that they had for their role and when you were experiencing the rolling blackout?
You know what? That's a great question. I don't want to lie and tell you that I think it was coal. At that time, I really didn't pay attention to the source, but I want to say maybe coal. But what I can do, I can ask my friend, and then I can definitely get back to you if it's of interest to you. Was that Deanna? Oh yeah, Deanna. Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, if you're interested, I can definitely follow up with you.
Great.
Okay. Any other questions?
It's Jackie here. I'd love to, thanks for sharing your story and your insights. I'd love to hear just a little bit more about that transition back and what the hardest things were for you personally in particular, but anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah, moving from the Middle East back to the States.
Mm-hmm.
Whew, yeah, so, well, the reason why, and I don't want to focus too much on it because I do want to talk a little bit more about DEI. But yeah, unfortunately, I mentioned previously that I did experience some microaggression. Well, unfortunately, I was fired. I lost my job, so I really wasn't prepared to come back. You have to remember, I was there for 5 years. So essentially, my friends were my family. I loved what I did. I was good at what I did. And the thing is, so here's the caveat to getting fired overseas. I was telling Kat earlier, if you listened to the news yesterday, I think Amazon let go 18,000 people, Microsoft 10,000. And I thought about all of them because I thought, wow, my heart goes out to them because I know how it feels. But thing is, when you're fired overseas, you have to leave, right? And so because I was there for 5 years, I had a car note, I had credit cards. So you have to pay back all of your debts before you can leave the country. And so to ensure that they get their money back, they place a travel ban on you. And so I couldn't even leave the country. I was stuck in the country for 3 weeks until I could pay back the money. Luckily, I had it, right? But, oh my gosh, if I didn't have it, would I still be there? Another thing, I was there by myself. So being a single woman, alone in a foreign country, you don't speak the language. It was scary. It was scary. I was genuinely afraid for my well-being. So, like I said, managed to pay off the money. And 2 weeks after I came back to the States, my niece passed away. So, you talk about trauma. You are fired from your job, you're uprooted from your home, you lose your friends, financial constraints, now a death. And so 2 days after my niece passed away, I had a heart attack in my 30s. And so at that time, I knew, okay, Kym, you're on the verge of a nervous breakdown. And I couldn't afford to have one because remember, I didn't have health insurance. And so that's when I really started to do a lot of healing and a lot of trauma work because I've always been fascinated with, what makes people so resilient? Why is it that some people can go through tragedy and come back stronger, whereas other people, it takes them a little bit more time. And so that's when I started to heal myself. And so I became a mental health coach. And then I became certified in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So in summary, to answer your question, the transition was extremely hard. It was extremely hard. But because of my journey, I want to be a role model for women, for people of color, to know that, hey, you can bounce back even better after overcoming or experiencing something that's traumatic, right? It's just having the tools and the support and the resources to do it. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you so much. Appreciate the insight.
No problem, no problem. Any other questions? I'm an open book. Feel free to ask me anything.
Yeah, like I have one. So I actually, your comment about the oil industry being not diverse. To me, it's a very interesting, stark difference in diversity between those who work in the industry and those who run the industry. Because I personally think like the oil industry was one of the most diverse industries I've ever worked in. I was working like side by side with people from Saudi, Cuba, like Louisiana, Canada, Alaska, like, just like all over the place. But then, obviously it's very obvious that like when you look up the totem pole, it just becomes a white dude. And so like, I mean, even the lack of women and, things like that, we all have the reasons as to why we didn't continue staying out there. I think it's because women are just like so over things that they're just like, goodbye, I'm not going to put up with this. But like that, to me, like that seems to be the catch in the oil industry and like the energy industry in general is like, there's so many amazing people out there, but it's like bridging that gap from like the people who are actually getting it out of the ground and moving it to the people who are running the businesses. And like that to me seems to be like, that's what I'm always so curious about. And like, it always just like, cause it stumped me like since I've gotten here as to why we can't fix that. Yeah.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And valid point. Most of the diversity is in the field, but when you get into, like you said, leadership, where is everybody? And so, yes, absolutely. That is something that we need to be proactive about for sure. Yeah. Any other questions?
Because I think it is some of what Danny was just touching on going to be in your actual prepared content too, Kym, on how you're working towards changing that whole dynamic.
Yes. Yeah. So absolutely. If you're ready to move on, so I have a treat. So if you are curious about diversity, equity, and inclusion, how does it work? How does it benefit the energy industry? I put together, this is a little PDF tool that I like to give to my new LinkedIn connection. So I'll just kind of go through it. Again, this is very informal. If you see something that sticks out, don't hesitate to come off mute and ask a question. And then what I'll do at the end of the presentation, I will put a link in the chat and you'll actually have access to the tool. So if you want it for your own personal knowledge, you can share it within your organization. All right, so I'll go ahead and share my screen. Okay, can everyone see? Okay, perfect. All right. So this is a little tool that I like to provide my new connections. I always feel like you should give something first when you're meeting someone new. So this is 4 essential ways to diversify the energy workforce to leverage innovation for 2050 net zero goal while saving time and money. And so this is in a nutshell what a DE&I consultant or manager within an organization does, right? And so the first thing that I do when I come into an organization is, what is the data? Who is in your organization, right? Do you have anything that indicates, who we need to recruit? So I'm just using this as an example because this would never be, but let's say an organization has too many women and they want to recruit more men. Well, you need to have data that indicates that, right? So we collect data. Once we look at who is in the organization and you have identified who you want to recruit, Then we set a target, right? And so it could be more women, it could be more people of color, it could be more people from the disabled community, right? This depends on the organization and their unique goals. And then also, is it Danny, to highlight your point, when we're recruiting, we don't want to just recruit, like you said, people in the field. We want to recruit a diverse pool of mid-level managers. We want to recruit a diverse pool of people that can go into leadership, right? Because when you see people that look like you in the organization, people who look like you who are in positions, it gives you hope, right? It inspires you. It lets you know, hey, if she can do it, I can do it too. And you're more inclined to reach out to that individual for coaching or mentorship, right? Another important factor when we talk about DE&I is employee surveys. And so I always like to refer to the iceberg, because senior leadership can be so far removed from what's going on at the ground. They may think everything is perfect. We have enough women. We don't need to diversify, our workforce. Again, referring back to Danny, a lot of the reasons that I hear from male leaders is that, women aren't interested in leadership positions because if they have a family, it will require them to work more. Or if they have to travel, they don't have childcare set in place. I mean, just ridiculous assumptions, which is basically what they are, as to why women, don't have an interest in advancing. But again, if you get out and talk to your people and do surveys, you may actually discover that, hey, there are tons of women that are overqualified to do the job. You just need to listen to them. So essentially, that's what a DE&I scorecard looks like. Who is in your organization, setting targets, KPIs, and then executing. Next is recruitment, right? It is essential to look at your recruitment process. And so where are you advertising? I believe it was, I hope I remember her name, was it Wendy, who does the STEM? Yeah, Wendy, okay. Perfect example. There are tons of STEM programs for young women out there, but if they aren't aware of the opportunities, how do they know to apply and take advantage of them? Another thing where we're looking at recruitment is their bias in the job description. So for example, I just had a meeting earlier with a company, and in their job description, there's a disclaimer that all applicants must be able to lift 80 pounds or more. And so we don't realize that, verbiage like that can be a turnoff to some women, right? Because 80 pounds is a lot. Resumes, how are resumes shortlisted? Is there diversity on interview panels? So do you have a nice mixture of women who are doing the interviews? And then last, who makes the final decision, right? So that is key in recruitment. Next, we move on to developing a strategy. And so this is the fun part. This is where it gets really interesting. So again, in order to increase your pipeline, you want to reach out to individuals like Wendy who are involved in STEM organizations, right? Internships are a great way to diversify your talent pool, right? And so that means partnering up with colleges. I attended a meeting yesterday. And I'm in Washington, D.C., by the way. And so there is a center in Washington, D.C., where they provide workforce development training. And so what that looks like is they recruit from, the community, free tuition. Kids don't have to pay anything. They provide childcare. They even give you a stipend. And so their goal is to remove all barriers to get people into these programs. And they train them so that way, by the time they graduate the program, they have the minimal skills and knowledge to go into an entry-level position. Their focus was primarily solar and wind, but still, it's a great initiative that a lot of people are not aware of. there are certain diversity focused job fairs. So for example, job fairs that cater to women are a great place to recruit. Employee referrals, right? You may have a colleague that worked at another agency with a phenomenal woman, right? Giving her an incentive, maybe like a bonus for referring colleagues is a great way. Also word of mouth and professional organization. So I know WOGA partners with people within the energy industry, right? And so these are great strategies to partner up with external organizations so that way you can get the word out. Because I tell you, not a lot of people, from my experience, not a lot of people know about the wonderful opportunities that are available to them in the industry. So it's just getting the word out there is critical. And then last but not least is retention. And for me, in my opinion, I feel like this is the most important aspect because I like to use this analogy, right? Let's say if I'm having a dinner party and I do all this recruitment, I'm on social media, I created flyers, I did a radio announcement, right? I'm putting all this money into getting people to come to my dinner party. But then when they get there, my house is in shambles, the food is horrible, right? No one will come back. In fact, they might not even stay to eat dinner. And so that's how I look at organizations. You know, we can put a lot of time and resources into, recruiting and developing strategies. But if we don't have mechanisms in place to keep people, then we're going to lose them. And, again, like Danny said, we're seeing that now. People are just saying, the heck with it, I'm gone. And so some great ways that we can retain, individuals when they come into the workplace is to have a successful onboarding and orientation, right? Most people decide within 3 months if they want to stay with an organization. And do you see the correlation? The average training should be 3 months. And so if you know that you're ready to leave within 3 months, that means you haven't been supported and you haven't been set up to succeed when you enter into an organization. And so a successful onboarding looks like mentorship, right? And so ideally, you will want, it could work both ways. You can have another woman sponsor you, right? A woman who's in senior leadership, you admire her, you want to be in her position, or you could have another, a man sponsor you. And the reason why I'm more of an advocate for that is because we get to see what it's really like, right? Men have been in these positions for years. And so we can see it from a different lens, right? Not only that, but it gives them an opportunity to get to know, women or people of color a little bit better. Because once you, develop a rapport and relationship with someone, you get to understand that there are other factors, outside of the workplace that contribute to our performance, right? And so sponsorship, again, from leadership is a great way. Equal pay. Pay and equity is a huge issue, right? And so some ways we can mitigate that is pay transparency. And so when we are applying for positions, why not list the pay? Right? We have to fill out the application, sometimes go through multiple interviews before HR even discloses how much we will be making. So why not make that information available up front? And we also need to pay women, for our experience, for our education, right? That's another way that we are going to keep and retain women. Inclusive benefits. I love inclusive benefits because one, we all know that, women have different needs than men. And so, for example, childcare, how many women, would step up and, go into, if you're a single mother, how many women would step up and go into, leadership, C-suite positions, right? If they knew that they had reliable childcare 24/7. Also, I think it was, which country is it? It's one of the Scandinavian countries, but just recently they passed a law where there are menstrual days. So when women get their cycle, they can take a paid day off, right? So I know the US is way behind that. But just some creative benefits that you can offer women, to get them to stay within the industry. And of course, last but not least, is offering flexibility. And so what does that look like? It may look different for each person. So that could be a hybrid work schedule. It could be, maybe working only part-time, or, more contracting or consulting positions, right? But just flexibility, so that way it makes it easier to show up and perform as our best selves. And so this is essentially what it looks like, what DEI looks like, what a consultant does when they're trying to recruit and retain diverse talent. And so with that being said, I'll go ahead and stop sharing, and again, any questions more about the process? If you have D&I at your organization, how do you think they're doing? Are they doing something similar to this, or something different? So would love to hear your insights and your feedback.
I'll go ahead. One of the things you talked about, job fairs and some of those things with colleges. I spent a lot of time doing some of that recruiting. I'm not an engineer, but I was kind of in the environmental side. So we were looking for some environmental scientists and some of those things, but we kept going to the same schools. And so when you go to the same school, you get the same people that are like the same people that you've already hired. So I think there's some kind of risk in that. And I think there's some of the larger companies that don't participate in those, but then you've lost another pool of people. So I think it's an interesting kind of affinity bias that really comes in when you've got the same decision makers going to the same schools, recruiting the same types of people. Then you don't end up with diversity in that regard, because they all came from Texas A&M or they all came from School of Mines. And so I don't know if there's a way you can coach companies, but I think you provided some great examples of other places to look for diverse groups. So that's great.
Yeah, thank you. No problem. Yeah, and that's the thing, if you're recruiting from the same pool, then yeah, like you say, you come across the same people, but spreading your wings, going out, horizontally to other organizations that are, can't have candidates just there, hey, pick me, I'm ready, I can do the job. But it works both ways. Diverse candidates don't know about the opportunities if they aren't exposed to them, and organizations don't know about the candidates if they aren't exposed to them, right? And so just, closing that gap is what we do. So thank you for sharing.
I have like a funny story, like two statements. I don't know if you guys know, you guys are more in the upstream side, but I work a lot in natural gas utilities. And Jack Dorsey from Metropolitan in Omaha, I saw his opening presentation for the MEA conference, and he said, like, I'm going to paraphrase it, but basically he had a daughter who's an engineer who had a kid. And when all of those things came to fruition, he realized that the 9-to-5 workforce was the reason why his daughter was not going to be an engineer anymore. And then he went to restructure Omaha, their utilities district, because he was like, if we want to keep women in the workforce, we're going to have to start looking through the lens of how can a woman complete her job and still be a mom, still be a parent, still be all of these things. And it was just really profound. And it was just really cool to see the president of this, your basic dude standing in front of this crowd of a bunch of other dudes saying, if we want to keep our daughters and our, all of our people in this world, and we want them to be engineers, then we need to rechange how we think about our structure of how we're doing things. And I just thought that was really cool. And it's just cool to see it. It's kind of almost shocking when you see it coming from out of the mouth of someone who looks like they should be we're going to do it how we've always done it. And this is how we're always going to do it. But it is cool to see. And I'm glad that the conversation's happening beyond just, us pushing it. Other people are starting to realize.
Danny, thank you for sharing. What is the name of the gentleman? And I think someone else wanted to know, where could they watch the
yeah, I can look it up and see. I'm on a few of their committees. So yeah, I can look and see if he's got it. But yeah, I'll find his, I think it's Jack Dorsey with Metropolitan, the president of Metropolitan Utilities District. But I think he's got something, I went and looked it up again, because it is something that he has been passionate about at Metropolitan as they kind of go through a modernization with their entire workforce. And I think the pandemic really also forced their hand. And it seems like they're looking at it from a positive perspective instead of like going at it with like a negative perspective. So
Well, thank you for sharing. Yeah, it's always great to have, people like that in your back pocket. So yeah. All right. And then Kelly, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to mention when I came on board with my new company, when they first enticed me over, that was something that brought me to them, was their different outlook on wanting to hire women and diversification and building a culture that's more about the work that we do. And we're mostly engineers and project managers. I do sales, but we create an environment where everybody works from home. So your time is yours. And in interviewing women, there's a lot of women, I always feel bad, that come to the interview table with, well, I just had a baby, so I do need, they're almost apologizing. I do need a little bit of time to breastfeed, or I hope this is okay. And something that's ingrained in our leadership culture is you don't have to apologize for any of that. You're being human. If you step away for 20 minutes from your desk, it's not the end of the world. Nobody cares. Do your thing, manage your family, do what you have to do, and show up ready to work when you're ready to work. And you're an adult. Get it done. So it's been extremely refreshing. And even so much, we had a fresh out of college engineer that we hired, and I felt so bad. She does go out to the field. She was out in the field and she called me, and horrible cramps. We've all been there. She's literally absolutely dying. She's on the phone crying. And I'm like, take a deep breath. This is not the company that we want to be. If you're not comfortable, if you have horrible cramps, that's not a detriment to you. That's not a negative. Men get sick too. Don't act like they don't. So just tell us that week you're not available for travel and we'll schedule around it. And the owner of the company, I reached out to him and he's like, completely understand. She doesn't have to say anything. Just say she's not available. We get it. And that's the culture we should all be going towards, is just being good humans and accepting when somebody's not comfortable or not feeling well, that we just go, okay, how do we make it better?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. But I think, her response is indicative of her previous work environment. As women, it's almost like we've been made ashamed to say, hey, I'm on my cycle, I'm cramping, or I need protected time to go pump. And it shouldn't be that way, because how can you show up and perform at your best when you're afraid to ask just for your basic needs, right? And so I love the company. It sounds like a really great company, Kelly. Wow.
Kelly, you just did some major recruiting, whether you meant to or not.
I know, right? Are you guys hiring? I'm just kidding.
Yes, any engineers, project managers, send them our way. We need tons of people. We're so on board with all the diversification. Work from home, anywhere, be a woman, be a man, be both. We don't care, bring it all. We just want good employees with a good attitude. And that's what we're developing over here. So.
And who are you with, Kelly?
Valor EPC. So we actually specialize in emissions. So we got a very niche in the industry, but it's a lot of fun.
And based in Denver area?
Based in Denver. We also have a office, so to speak. We all work from home, but an office in Houston. And then we have several engineers that are all over the country because we have projects everywhere. So it really is just be a good human, be an adult. If you have 40 hours of work, I don't care if you could do it at 2 a.m. or at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. You want to take Wednesday off to go ski, go take Wednesday off to go ski. Just get your stuff done,
I literally took Wednesday off to go ski this week. So love that point.
Wow. Okay. And I think, is it Alyssa?
Yeah, thank you, Kym. I envy your culture that you have going on there, Kelly. But I guess my question is more so, if we don't work for a company where upper management is understanding for the needs of the diverse workforce. I think it's pretty obvious that a lot of us work in oil and gas and the energy sector, and this has been an industry that hasn't been very friendly towards women. So, how do we approach if upper management, CEOs, don't have the perspective of allowing flexibility for their work staff. How do you get up to upper management to change their culture and mindset um, around allowing flexibility in their workforce?
Yeah, so, well, has it been brought to their attention? I guess that would be my first question. And if it has, what has their response been?
Yeah, so I can't say that I've been in on those conversations. I know that things have been spoken about internally with employees at the company. Um, but I guess maybe that's a better question. Who to start with, right? Who do you start with? HR? Do you start with, where in the company do you go to start having those conversations?
Yeah, well, first place I would look, I don't know if there's a telework policy that's in place, but you might want to check that first just to see what their policy is. And then in terms of flexibility, a lot of times the policy will answer those questions. If it's not within the policy, then of course you always want to follow the chain of command just in case it comes back to bite you. But you definitely want to get something in writing from your manager. So probably email them, your concerns and what your requests are and why you need it, right? And so this is what's currently happening. This is what I would like, and this is how it would benefit my job performance, right? And then if they aren't able to oblige, then work your way up. So their manager, because you always want to demonstrate to HR that, yes, I spoke to my direct line manager about it, nothing's happening. And so could you please intervene? That's what I would do. But from an organizational standpoint, do you have an employee resource group dedicated to women?
We do not.
Oh, okay. Because a lot of times, a lot of change comes from employee resource groups.
We
But
have
if
an engagement committee,
okay.
but not the same.
Okay, got it. Is there some way that, there can be like an employee pulse survey just to, talk about the flexibility? Because other people, there could be tens, hundreds of other people that have the same concerns as you. But if leadership isn't aware of it, then there won't be that incentive to change. So that could be another avenue as well.
Okay. I know that we did an employee survey at my company, but I had started after that survey was taken. And I know that we're planning on doing another one here this year. But maybe my concerns is that if that is not a question in the survey, then there's no way for them to collect that data. So other than if there's a, open-ended provide, whatever feedback you want. So just
Okay.
trying to figure out how to get this issue in
Yeah.
front of the right people so that it.
Uh-oh.
Oh, I think I might have.
Oh, try one more time, Alyssa. You froze and then you came back briefly.
Okay, can you guys hear me now?
Yep. Now you're back.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, just trying to make sure that that I get this in front of the right people, that it ends up on a survey question. That's all.
Yeah, so normally I'm not sure how your survey will be designed, but sometimes there's a comment section. So if the question wasn't asked, you can, type in your comment. But in the interim, don't wait until the survey is released. I would, first check your telework policy, see what it states in terms of the flexibility that you're seeking. And then if it doesn't address it, then yeah, talk to your line manager. If they can't accommodate you, just work your way up until you get to HR. You always want to have a paper trail and something documented to show that you did, what the organization says is the right thing.
Awesome. Thank you, Kym.
You're welcome.
Kym, I had a question. So something that I think about quite often is, so not just driving things from the business perspective, but how can we also drive things from a general political perspective? Because I see, like, from my background, I'm actually from Canada originally, and a lot of like the government really drives a lot of the programs that, you know, businesses have to comply with and live within, you know, whether that's from a tax perspective or, like, for example, you know, if healthcare is paid for in a different way, like if you have healthcare covered through government programs versus a company, you know, people can work 25 hours or 30 hours a week and they don't have to stress that they don't have benefits. So that's kind of like a roadblock for women here, because they can't really make that choice because most companies won't offer them benefits. Or, you know, the government is driving that you have to give women a year of maternity leave. So, but it's also paid for through unemployment insurance. So the company is not burdened with actually paying for women to take that time off. So they, you know, they do have to cover someone to take that role on for the certain amount of time, but they're not deterred from hiring a woman with the fear that they're going to have to pay them like salary for 4 months, 60% or whatever it is. So, you know, I'm not advocating saying that's like the best plan ever. I'm just like kind of pointing out that a lot of things can be driven from the political landscape. So do you have any tips or ideas of how people could get involved with things like that to help drive things from a different perspective?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So as I said, I'm outside of Washington, D.C., which is where the federal agencies are. And so the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, they just passed legislation where they're allocating, I think it's $300 billion to the energy industry. And a lot of that funding is going towards the workforce. Now, how that impacts private organizations, I'm not sure. I do believe some of that money is available for funding, so organizations can apply to receive money. So that's one. The second way is I would look at some nonprofit organizations or bipartisan organizations and become a member of them, because they do a lot of political work, like lobbying, congressmen to try to get, laws changed. So those are two areas that I would look into in terms of a political perspective.
Cool. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Oh yeah, and vote. Lisa says vote.
I'd love to hear a little bit more about the programs that you've seen and recommended once you have, as you start to recruit folks and bring more diverse candidates into an organization. I've seen some effective things, around internal organizations and some things like that. But what are some of the strategies you see that are effective and maybe a little bit out of the box and, working for today's workforce in order to keep people included and part of our teams?
Yeah, so not really sure if this is out of the box, but I would say mentorship has been the most effective, right? Because as soon as you onboard, you have someone there who's literally holding your hand, someone who you can relate to, someone who can support you not only professionally, but personally. And so what mentorship does is you have someone who is experienced and senior in the organization. So they already know, the personality types, they know the politics, they know how you can work your way up the ladder. And so studies show that when you have a mentor or a job coach assigned to you, not just, during training and onboarding, but throughout the life of your tenure at an organization, that's what gets people to stay, right? Because that mentor can advocate for you on your behalf. I'm sure you've heard the cliche that you want to network with people who speak your name in rooms that you're not in. And that's what a mentor can do. And that will allow women to climb the corporate ladder a lot faster. And so that's what I've seen to be the most successful. Another one is internships with college students. Summer internships give students the opportunity to come within the organization to learn the ropes, right? And to really decide, all right, is this an industry that I want to enter? And if yes, I already have relationships built. I know how things work. So when they graduate, they're more inclined to go with that organization. So I would say those two initiatives, my experience, have been the most successful.
Appreciate your insight. Thanks.
No problem. All right. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question, Kim. What are some of the ways when you get in the door and you're doing your pitch deck or however you proceed on why we should hire you and why is diversity, equity, and inclusion important? Do you have a lot of data that you hit, and do you get specific about where different groups contribute in different ways, or what does that look like?
No. So at the end of the day, it's a business, right? And people are in business to make revenue. And so if your revenue is impacted, you want to do something, right? And so how I pitch is I make the correlation between, belonging. So, and this is a fact. I believe is it Forbes says that turnover increases by 50% for employees who, don't feel like they belong. Right. And so if you think about it from a financial perspective, if you're losing employees, the industry standard says it takes 1.5 times the salary to advertise, to hire, to train an employee to put them in a position, right? But meanwhile, what happens is that the remaining employees have to take the brunt of the work, that's not getting done. There's also numerous studies from McKinsey, right? McKinsey does numerous women in the workplace studies. I can send you some of their recent studies, but there's studies that show that women in leadership, increase company margins more so than men in leadership, right? And so when you look at those statistics, data doesn't lie. Take personal feelings away from it. You can't, dispute numbers. And so making that financial correlation, is a big driver. But then also you have climate change, right? Like we have to do something about this crisis, because if we don't, there might not be a planet, for our grandchildren. Or if it is, it's not one that I would want to live on. And so, when we're talking about climate change, we have to include everyone in on the conversation. And so normally they get it. Normally the light bulb comes on when you explain it to people in that way.
How do you speak to groups other than women to encourage other types of diversity?
Other types of diversity outside of women?
Yes.
Well, if you have, let's say, if you have people of color, for example, who are in your organization, and so studies say that, if people don't feel like they belong, or if they are experiencing microaggressions, studies show that they have a 50% chance of leaving. And so again, it goes back to revenue, productivity, morale, also brand recognition, right? If we want to recruit people into these positions, when you go to job fairs, it's vital that you have people that reflect the community within the organization, right? And so that's how I speak to other communities, speak about other communities outside of women. Okay, any other questions? Oh, Leah, you had a question?
I do. How does a person navigate creating like the women's group that you talked about, or any other group inside a company for any sort of other underrepresented persons without ostracizing some people or not being respectful of those persons in general with my ignorance or my assumptions. Like, for people who want to make things inclusive, how do you not step on your own face trying to do this for folks, and make assumptions, or, you know, all of the bad things that could happen, even if you have the greatest of intentions?
Yeah.
How do you even do that?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And actually, this kind of piggybacks off, I think it was Jackie's question. So this is something that is kind of innovative and that I am seeing now in organizations. So one, employee resource groups, you can have different themes, right? So you can have, they're called ERGs, employee resource groups for women. You can have employee resource groups for veterans, for LGBTQ, right? But in order to make it inclusive, what they are starting to do is to facilitate safe space sessions. And so what that looks like is the ERG will meet, but it's open to the general public. And people can come. They aren't allowed to talk, but they can come and just be a fly on the wall and just listen to some of the issues that women are dealing with on the job, right? And so what I've noticed in those safe space sessions, it gives people, you can hear objectively, right? Because if it's just one person, you kind of dismiss the claim. But when you have multiple women, sharing what's going on, sharing how they're feeling, sharing how they're trying to balance, work and life, people are more inclined to listen. And when people are educated and aware, then that's when you start to see change happen. So yeah, safe space sessions are a great way to have a platform where you can voice your concerns, but also be inclusive of others as well.
Do you hire somebody to set that up in your organization, or are there resource guides out there? Because I'm not a veteran, I'm not LGBTQ, so how can I, set this up within my company, or how do I provide that to HR in my company to do that? Like, how do I even start?
Sure. So what I've seen, volunteers, normally people volunteer within the organization, raise their hand and coordinate these groups. Unfortunately, it's unpaid, it's a voluntary position. But yeah, it takes a few, courageous people to step up and say, hey, we want to start facilitating employee resource groups. If you have a consultant, sometimes with consultancy, starting employee resource groups is part of that work or strategy that is done. So yeah, what I'll do, I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to give you the resource that I have, but it has my contact information. If you're interested in maybe just starting off with a women's ERG, feel free to reach out and then we can discuss offline. But let me just share, give me 1 second.
I might also just recommend, Leah, maybe like even an ESG group or ESG committee that could look at the E, the S, and the G things, so that it's not so siloed and singled out into this inclusion diversity, but that it's overall a bigger effort at the company. And then you could do air emissions and water and waste and some of those things. And then the social aspects of it just naturally fit in with a group like that. And there's ways to set up health and safety committees or ESG committees and those types of things that might be an angle that is inclusive of a lot of people, but also gives you that little opportunity to discuss some of those hard topics that people shy away from when you call it a diversity group or something.
Thank you, Melanie. Yeah. All right, everyone. So I dropped the link in the chat. So again, it's the PDF tool that I went over. Feel free, it's yours if you want to share it. I have my email and website on it in case you want to reach out. And it has been a pleasure today. I hope this was informative for you. And hopefully I will see you again soon.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Kym.
Thank you. Thank you for
Awesome.
coming.
All right, and definitely before you all drop, I strongly encourage you to share that document, the consent, with your organizations. If you want more, Kym is definitely interested in building her business and in our industry. So if you see a challenge at your own company, definitely reach out to HR and make some introductions. I have done that. I know some of the folks that are on the meeting today have also done that. So we really appreciate all of those efforts as well. So any final questions? All right. Well, excellent. We will close a little bit early today then. Thank you all for joining. I did record the session, so I will get it out onto the YouTube channel. And Kym, thank you so much. You are doing great work, and we look forward to watching you bloom and develop even further on LinkedIn and hopefully through some of our own organizations.
Thank you. Thank you, Kat.
All right. Thanks, everyone.